What's up everyone, Gus here, Squid Research Lab Sociologist, bringing you a brand new video on a topic of weapon bans and restrictions in the competitive scene of Splatoon. After a recent one-off tournament called IDYLL, IDYLL, that limited the use of certain weapons, for example, limiting every team from being able to use only one shooter max in their team composition, some members of the Splatoon community began advocating for weapon restrictions and bans to be the standard across all tournaments in the competitive scene, instead of just being a one-off thing. This is not something new. If you've been in the community long enough, you would know that this is a conversation that pops up every now and then. So for this video, I'll take a deep dive where I conduct my research on the issue, explore what some of the members of the community think, and at the end, I'll give you my overall thoughts on the matter. Please note that this is an analysis of bans and restrictions of the competitive scene, not about Turf War, Anarchy, X Battle, or Salmon Run. It's a conversation where we attempt to understand why some members in the competitive scene who play in organized tournaments want to see weapons such as Splash-O-Matic or Crab Tank limited or completely banned across all tournaments, for example. As always, if you enjoyed the video, subscribe, like, and comment. Please let me know what you think about the issue in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. So with that out of the way, let's get started with the video. A few weeks ago, there was a tournament, IDYLL, where restrictions and bans were set in place for teams that wanted to participate in the tournament. These restrictions included for your team compositions, no repeated specials, having 3 unique weapon classes in your team composition, being limited to only one shooter in your team composition, and you couldn't use special charge up for your crab, strike, or missiles. So for example, if a team wanted to run a double vanilla splash, which has been a frequent occurrence in the competitive scene given the overall strengths of the kit, a team would be unable to use that team composition since it goes against the rules of repeated specials and one shooter maximum. Here are a couple of examples of team compositions used during the tournament. We saw several high-level teams participate in the tournament, which included the likes of Kings, Last Resort, and a team called NFT Win, which was a combination of Starburst players and FT Win players, who eventually won the whole event. And it was a really exciting grand finals to watch. The tournament was really meant to be a one-time thing, but after this tournament ended, some Splatoon players raised question as to why restrictions and bans were not a standard practice across all tournaments. So to explore this issue, I made a poll on my Twitter asking, should the competitive scene adopt weapon bans and or restrictions in tournaments? People had 4 options to choose from. From this poll, 35% voted for the first option, that bans and restrictions should be adopted. 38% voted only restrictions should be adopted, not bans. 23% voted that this action should only be for gimmick tournaments, such as IDYLL, which was a one-off tournament. And finally, 4% said no bans, no restrictions. While the poll is really small with only 675 votes, and this should not be a representative of the whole competitive Splatoon community, the poll was really meant to start the conversation and help me understand why some people wanted restrictions and bans in the first place. So let's start off with the first option. Let's take a look at why some would want bans and restrictions in the competitive scene of Splatoon. Elias said, I think bans, restrictions should be put in place. As a competitive scene, we should be put in charge of how diverse and fun the game is on the competitive field. While it may seem unfair to some, a fun game is better than a bland game. This is honestly the most common argument in advocating for bans and restrictions that I have seen. Often the weapons in question that members want to see outright banned is Splash-O-Matic and Crab Tank, given the weapon's chokehold on the meta. At a high level, if you're not using Splash in your team composition, 9 times out of 10 you're probably throwing away the set or the tournament. And even if you do not play in the competitive scene, there have been viewers of these tournaments expressing that watching the same thing on both sides is boring, with some members of the Splatoon community, who will not be named in this video, going as far as calling comps that have double splash or triple splash and a machine as lazy. In a game filled with 11 unique weapon classes, it's no surprise that some people want to see more unique comps in a tournament level. This is understandable criticism of how the members of the competitive scene should be in charge of the scene instead of waiting for a balance patch to shake things up. Why not take the actions now rather than wait for Nintendo to do something about the game balance? While this isn't a common argument used for the restrictions and the bans, there are some members who think that only restrictions should be considered, not bans. The difference between wanting bans versus restrictions is that bans is about preventing someone from using a particular weapon, for example, whereas restrictions is more about limiting the use of a certain weapon. So let's see what some people have to say about wanting restrictions only. Blue said, I personally feel weapon bans aren't a good solution for the Splatoon comp scene, since it decreases the amount of options to a significant degree, which ultimately leads to less variety. I'm in full support of restrictions like no repeated weapons or repeated specials, or to not run a certain ability for a certain weapon or special, since I feel it makes players be creative with their comps and not be limited to using only few selected weapons. And this is a fair criticism of not wanting bans. While it may or may not lead to less variety, preventing someone from using a weapon that they wish to use to help their team win the set or the whole tournament could be unfair. And I think this is very detrimental for people that are considered one-tricks or specialists for a specific weapon. Let's say, for example, someone just happened to play Splash-O-Matic since the beginning of the game, since Splatoon 2, since Splatoon 1, and now that their weapon is meta, they can't play the weapon. It could lead to some people not being able to contribute as much as they wanted to. While restrictions or bans may seem appealing to the majority, there are still members who think that no bans or restrictions should be put in place. IDYLL makes a good point about bans and restrictions at this point of Splatoon 3's lifecycle. IDYLL says, I don't think we should ban anything until there stops being updates. Remember, Splatoon 3 is only 6 months old as of this video. If we begin to start making limitations or bans now, will it actually reflect how the meta will shift in the future? A month from now, Crab Tank can no longer be as a big problem because of Kraken. I don't know. And either way, how would bans be determined across the board? Who would determine what is worthy of a ban or not for a game that continues to receive updates? It gets very complicated, very hard to track, and I'm not sure if this is the direction we want to go. So what do? Should we put bans or restrictions? Should there be nothing done? Should Steve continue to be the menace it is in Smash because of the hit stun canceling tech? Oh wait, hold on, that's the wrong script. Okay, we're back. So what should we do? Honestly, I agree with the 23% of people who voted that restrictions and bans should be limited to gimmick tournaments or one-off events. And there's a couple of reasons why. Here are my top 3 reasons why. Number 1, live updates. As mentioned by IDYLL already, the game is still being updated. If a tournament organizer wants to express their vision for a one-off tournament that does not impact the standard across all tournaments, that's completely okay. It's still too early to say what cannot and can be used in several tournaments for a game that is continuously updated for the next upcoming years. Some players point to the Steve ban conversation from the Smash community as an example of why the Splatoon community should adopt bans themselves, but the biggest difference between these two franchises is that Smash Ultimate no longer gets updates. Splatoon 3 is still getting updates. Number 2, these tournaments are really designed to be one-offs. I spoke with Beta, the head organizer of this event, and they expressed that this tournament was really meant to be a one-time thing, to just get away from the triple splash comps and provide a fresh perspective to the viewers for a bit. In our conversation, Beta said they hosted IDYLL because they knew people, especially spectators, were getting extremely tired of triple crab loadouts, and they wanted to create something that could serve as a temporary distraction from that while we waited for Nintendo to remember how game balance works. It was never intended to start a conversation about standardizing bans. It was just supposed to be a one-time thing. Beta was not advocating through this tournament that it should be a standard practice in other tournaments such as Proving Grounds, for example. They just wanted to organize a one-time tournament for people to enjoy, not worry about double or triple splash, and have an enjoyable time. And my last reason, which I think is the most important thing to understand when looking at restrictions and bans in any competitive environment, and that's unintended consequences. This is a set of words that I often hear in my career, because while one policy change may sound good, you never know how it's actually going to play out when the policy's in place. The same applies to Splatoon. Once we start setting these rules, which can be set in good faith, it may lead to the opposite of the outcome you wish to see. So for example, if a tournament organizer says no duplicative specials are allowed in their tournament, we can clearly see that this is a way to limit the usage of double crab or double booyah bomb because of how Splash and Machine have dominated the meta. But what does this mean for other teams that have team compositions where they have a duplicative special, but those weapons are not meta weapons like Splash or Machine? This was something I talked with Beta about after they received feedback in the help desk channel for their tournament. For example, one team expressed the challenges with the rule set of duplicative specials because it hurt their specific composition. They said that their team had someone who mained dually scorchers, so if they wanted to run a heavy splatling, they couldn't. They had to swap the dually scorchers. Because of this rule of duplicative specials, which I imagine was intended to target double crab, it unintentionally affected a team that used double wavebreaker, a special which honestly does not have the same impact of a crab tank, for example. This is all to say that once we start making limitations, you will not know 100% the outcomes that you anticipate. Yes, you may see the outcome you were intending for, such as limiting crab tanks, but you cannot capture all of the consequences and how this will impact the whole player base. Remember, this is just one example from one restriction, but if you continue going down the rabbit hole of this specific rule, you'll see the countless impacts that it could potentially have once players start playing in the tournament. And that's why I think what Beta is saying is true. This should remain as a one-off tournament. It should not be the standard across the board. They acknowledge that these rules could impact players and are always taking feedback to improve this tournament if it's hosted in the future. Well everybody, what do you think? After watching this video, do you still think restrictions and bans should be a thing? Or do you see now that the intention of the tournament organizer and why it should remain a one-off thing? Let me know in the comments, and as always, thanks for watching.